Collecting LEGO minifigures is my favorite part about collecting LEGO. I love that you can collect figures from different themes like Star Wars, Marvel, Lord of the Rings, and it all fits into the same compatible system. So I thought I would take a look back at my collection from childhood and pick out my top 10 most nostalgic LEGO minifigures. Let's go. Coming in at number 10 is Cloud City Boba Fett. That's right, he's number 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Comment, like, subscribe, hit the noti bell. Thanks for watching. Truly coming in at number 10 is the original Phase 2 plain white clone trooper from Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith. That's the first Star Wars movie that I ever saw in theaters, and the 2005 wave of LEGO Star Wars Revenge of the Sith sets is my all-time favorite wave because of how nostalgic it is to me. I was fortunate enough as a kid to get every set except for the turbo tank, which meant I had all sorts of different colored clone troopers. I didn't know what battalion they were in, but I knew I had a green trooper, a yellow trooper, a plain white trooper, a pilot, and they were my favorite troopers to play with of any theme, any era of Star Wars. And this year I finally got that turbo tank and completed that 2005 wave. Coming in at number 9 is a classic castle figure simply named Dark Forest Forestman 2, who was unique to the Dark Forestman Fortress, which was a really hard to get set back in the day. I'm very grateful my brother had it. I love this figure. It's blue accents, the really unique torso for a castle figure at that time. This was the figure I always had leading my knights and going into battle. At number 8 is Johnny Thunder. Before we had Indiana Jones, we had this adventurer. Growing up in the mid to late 90s, as a kid, before there was Star Wars or Harry Potter, the Adventurers was my favorite LEGO theme. And the Desert Sub theme would be my favorite of the Adventurers line. I really liked the hieroglyphic pillars and would constantly use those in my mocks as a kid, going even back to the Clone Trooper from the start. I almost picked Pharaoh Hotep for this list because I think it's a better figure, but Johnny Thunder is just so iconic, I couldn't not pick him. I think what holds him back from being higher is just that when Star Wars and Harry Potter came out, they pretty much overtook what I got collecting LEGO. At number 7 is Count Dooku, and he's interesting to be on this list because I actually didn't have him as a kid. He's one of 2 minifigures on this list that I didn't own, but because of the video game, I wanted him so bad. I did have the hilt though, the lightsaber hilt, but I didn't have him, so I had to get creative. I wanted him so bad I took a Professor Snape and an old Ben figure, and I'd mixed the two together to create my own version of Count Dooku. The Tobey Maguire Spider-Man from Spider-Man 2 is such a good figure that I still think it holds up today. This is coming from a time when there really weren't a lot of superhero options you could pick from like there is today. I was fortunate enough to have both versions of this Spider-Man. I really still want that wrestling figure one. And of the 2 that I do have, I think the dark blue does look a little bit better than the light blue from the first Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire. And maybe I have my nostalgia goggles tied a bit too tight around my head, but I think these 2 figures hold up a little bit better than the new one does. Darth Maul takes the 5th spot on my most nostalgic list. You can see the cape is really frayed from all the battles he was in from when I was a kid. I actually got this figure before I'd even seen Star Wars. My parents got me that lightsaber duel set with Qui-Gon Jinn, and this was before figures were printed with a flesh tone. So to have a figure with red skin on a black face, it just stood out really well to me. Plus you gotta love the double lightsaber. William Dafoe's Green Goblin glides in at number 4 for this list. I love this figure so much. Back then, to have a figure that was this detailed in printing with that green mask, the gold accents, plus it came in one of my absolute favorite sets. I think my absolute favorite Spider-Man set of all time, the Origins. That was such a great set. And it has a face print underneath the mask too. This is one of my most used minifigures, I'd say, for being a kid. And when I found it after my dark age, I was so happy to see it was actually in much better condition than I was expecting it to be in. I know this version of the Green Goblin isn't everyone's favorite version, but the Sam Raimi trilogy is so nostalgic to me, this is my favorite version. And I use this exact figure to bust out the windows on the Daily Bugle in my city instead of the comic version that came with the set. Cloud City Boba Fett comes in at number 3 on this list. Yeah, not number 1. Not to take away from this figure, he is absolutely fantastic. The leg printing, arm printing, hip printing, he was truly one of the best figures of his time, and he holds up today. I prefer this Boba Fett over the new ones just because of how nostalgic it is to me, but he's not number one. There were a couple of figures that are more nostalgic to me, but this was still used so much when I was a kid for playing. I was so relieved to find that he is still in fantastic shape. I really wasn't expecting that. I actually found him last year when I was home for Brick Fair, Virginia. He was just sitting in a mug. So I basically shrieked for joy. My mom was like, "Are you okay?" So he is super nostalgic to me. I have the other Boba Fett with no hip printing, arm printing, leg printing, and I mean, of course this one was going to be picked over that one every single time. And I love his Slave 1. The second iteration of the Slave 1 I got for Christmas, and that to this day remains one of my favorite Christmas presents. So this is a fantastic figure. It's just not number one for me, but boy, am I still lucky and grateful to have this figure. Darth Vader takes the second spot. He's just such an iconic character, and in LEGO, he's just so awesome. As a kid, I loved that helmet, the chrome lightsaber hilt, and it really helped he came in a lot of sets, so he wasn't like a difficult figure to obtain. And he is my favorite character in Star Wars, so, of course he's going to be high on this list. He's my favorite. I even prefer this Darth Vader to the newer one. I know that's probably, again, my nostalgia goggles a bit too tight around my head, but this is so nostalgic to me. It beats out that newer mold, even if it is more accurate. And as a kid growing up, I wanted to be Anakin Skywalker or Darth Vader. I mean, I was them for multiple Halloweens in a row. I just wear my Jedi costume or Darth Vader costume. I wanted to be one of these two characters. I almost did put this Anakin Skywalker on this top most nostalgic figures to me list, but I didn't want to have two, Anakin Skywalkers on the same list. At least one where it was wide to all my figures, because it was just so hard to pick 10. But I love this figure too, not to take away from it. And while I have these two figures here, I figured I would show you one more Anakin Skywalker figure I had from being a kid that is so nostalgic to me. He's still the same way he was when I was a kid. The first honorary mention on this list is Jedi Master Yoda. He is a great figure. I love the color sand green. He almost made the list. The other 10 figures were, to me, more nostalgic than he was. But as a kid, he was so different because he was short and he had that rubber head. I wanted to put him next to Dobby from Harry Potter, but unfortunately that figure is still lost to me at this time. The only other short figures I can remember were the Ewok and the Goblin from Harry Potter as well. So he just really stood out amongst all the other figures. The skeleton also makes this honorary mentions list, and maybe there's people out there who don't see this as a traditional minifigure, and I guess I can understand that, but this is my list, and I want him on it. And I love the dangly arms much more than the newer one. But yeah, I love this figure. He could be put in anything, and he usually ended up with a spear or sword in his chest. The third honorary figure actually shares it with two other figures. I couldn't simply just pick one of these three figures, and despite what the list looks like, Harry Potter was probably my biggest theme I collected as a kid, not Star Wars, but there's no figures representing the top 10 spots. I really wanted to put one of these three figures on it, but I couldn't pick one over the other. I mean, they're almost the exact same figure, just change out the head and the hairpiece. But I wanted to mention them here just because they are so nostalgic to me that I thought honoring them all together in this one spot was fair enough. If this was a top 10 most nostalgic LEGO theme list, then yeah, I could see Harry Potter taking number one easily. And I still have the original Hogwarts castle from the Sorcerer's Stone and Chamber Secrets in my LEGO room. Those sets were so good, and they had all those fun pieces and all those cool figures. Yeah, I could see this being number one, but for this list being LEGO minifigures, unfortunately, these three will just have to sit in the honorary mentions. Jango Fett is the number one most nostalgic LEGO minifigure of my entire collection. If you remember earlier in the video, I mentioned that there were two figures on this list that I didn't actually own as a kid. Well, this is that second figure, and he's coming in at number one. One of the reasons he takes this number one spot is because as a kid, I played the LEGO Star Wars video game on GameCube constantly, and when I played in free play, he was always on my roster. It was interesting how he had a white helmet and jet backpack instead of the silver one that's on this figure. Well, I didn't own Jango Fett as a kid. My best friend Rory, he did own him, and I was always at his house when we were playing Lego. So I still played with him a lot as a kid, I just didn't own him. But coming out of my dark age, the first retired set I did buy was the Jango Fett Slave 1, which has been on my shelf on display ever since I've gotten it. I also love how this Jango Fett has a yellow minifigure head, and I think that just helps with how nostalgic he is. If I was doing a top 10 favorite Lego minifigures of my collection, I could see him going number 1, so I might have to try that one day. The one thing I don't like about this list is how many characters on here are from Star Wars, when there are plenty of other nostalgia figures in my collection. So I might have to go back and look at my collection again and maybe do top 10 most nostalgic Harry Potter, maybe just Star Wars, original Lego IP, so let me know if that's something you'd like to see, because I think I'm going to dig in eventually and do that. But anyways, Jango Fett's number 1 on my top 10 most nostalgic Lego minifigures of my collection. And there it is, that's my top 10 most nostalgic Lego minifigures of my collection. So what do you think? Do you have any of these figures on your top 10 list? Do you think it's fair that I had 2 figures I didn't own on this top 10 list? And Cloud City Boba Fett at number 3, do you agree with that? Regardless, Jango Fett stands as my number 1 most nostalgic Lego minifigure of my collection.